Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Shalom. Thank you for coming out tonight and to our studio audience that we're going to live stream on. So thank you all for your interest in this. Very happy to welcome Dr. Justin Coulson to Shalom and to Bundaberg today. This afternoon, Justin spoke to teachers from across the Catholic schools and St John's on the issue of emotional intelligence. Now, teachers, you know, after 3 o'clock and leading into 5 o'clock are a tough gig for a presenter, but Justin really engaged our teachers this afternoon on that topic. Your interest here tonight and the advertised issue of anxiety, all of us in society know that for whatever reasons, for a multitude of reasons, that this is a big issue for us in society. For many of our children, for many of us, just that struggle to stay well is a real challenge and a really important challenge. And I know that a lot of us here tonight will be looking for tips and some skill sets that might help our children manage the world well. Justin has a doctorate in psychology. He's written a number of books. He's appeared in all sorts of venues and with media. His books are on sale later on if you'd like. He gives us, I think, some very practical experience from working with his, not working with his 6 daughters, but I'm sure that you don't just practice on them, do you, Justin? But being a father and being a practitioner of working with young people and working in this field that's sort of so challenging. I'm really hoping we all pick up a lot tonight. Please join with me in welcoming Dr. Justin Coulson.
Thank you, Dan. Hi, it's so good of you to come out tonight because I know that, actually it's not Married at First Sight, that's finished. What was on tonight that you had to give up to be here for? Whatever it was terrible. This is going to be so much better. Let's get stuck into it straight away. We have about an hour and a quarter, hour and a half, and I want to tell you the approach that I am taking, the approach that I'm not taking tonight. So I'm not taking a clinical psychologist's approach to anxiety tonight. Why? Because I can only give you general advice. I used to lecture in psychopathology at university. I could very easily open up the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual and start telling you about the different ways that we can diagnose anxiety and what it is, and you'd all fall asleep in just a couple of minutes. And apart from that, other than somebody in the front row, how many of you are counsellors or psychologists? Okay, so there's approximately 3 or 4 of you. For those 3 or 4 of you, you may be disappointed because it's not a clinical night, and if you're hoping for clinical insight, I just can't do that for you. I actually don't think that it's appropriate in this context. So what I'm going to be doing for all of you is focusing on what mums and dads, what caregivers, what significant adults in the lives of these young people need, what you need to guide children as they encounter anxiety. And we're going to talk about it in a couple of different ways. We're going to talk about it as a clinical presentation, but again, really basically, not going into the nitty-gritty of the clinical stuff. But more than that, we're probably just going to talk about what to do when the kids are anxious. Because there's a tremendous difference between a child being anxious and a child having anxiety. Kind of like there's a really big difference between a child having a rough time at school one day with some friends and a child being bullied. Or like a child feeling miserable and a child being depressed. Anxiety, to be diagnosed clinically, has to be long-lasting. It has to include a whole lot of symptoms that the psychologist in the room could tell us all about tonight. And most of your children, most of the time, are not suffering from an anxiety disorder. Most of the time, they're feeling a little bit of anxiety about something that's going to happen. And that's normal, healthy, and natural. So we'll talk more about that and what we can do as parents to guide our children through their anxious moments. Now, if you do have children who have anxiety that have been diagnosed, maybe even medicated, the tips and ideas, the strategies and principles that I'll share tonight will still be very useful. But I'm not standing here in a clinical sense tonight. I'm here to provide a general overview of anxiety as it applies to most families most of the time when you're dealing with kids from prep through to year 12. Let's get a quick take on the audience. Now, I can't survey the home audience, I'm sorry, hello. But for those of you who are here tonight, how many of you have got kids who are in those lower years of primary up to grade 3? Hands up. Wow, okay, overwhelming majority. How many of you got kids from 4th, 5 and 6? How many of you put your hands up both times? Okay, all right, okay, that makes sense. How many of you got kids in high school? How many of you got a lot of kids? Okay, I've got 6. Does anyone beat 6? No? All right, anyone with me at 6? Okay, well. Whew, I can feel good about something at least. All right, well, let's dive into it. Let's get into an overview. Then we'll talk about a few stories, we'll share a few examples, and we'll get into the practical tips, okay? So number 1, what we're going to cover is some definitions and data. Then we're going to look very closely at 5 reasons that anxiety happens. And they're not the typical reasons that you might read about in the blogs. They're a little bit more practical than that because the blogs are often written by people who have just copied off what some psychologist said on the web. Next, really importantly, how to recognise anxiety. And then we're going to finish up with tools to better manage anxiety, regardless of whether we've got a clinical presentation or just a kid who's feeling really worried and apprehensive about the future. So let's get into it and let's talk about anxiety. This is according to the American Psychological Society. That shouldn't say society. That should say association. The APA, or is it the APS? I always get confused. Can a psychologist in the room help me out? What do we call it in Australia? It's the APS in Australia. Pretty sure it's the APA in America. Whatever it is, it's the governing body in America, it's the fancy pants one. And this is what they say: anxiety is an emotion characterised by feelings of tension, worried thoughts, and physical changes like increased blood pressure. So you know that there's 3 things with anxiety. There's the feeling, there's the thinking, and there's a physiological change associated with it. And you know what it's like when you feel anxious? Like if you were running late to get here tonight, and I know a couple of you were definitely not late. Some people were here like 30 minutes early. It was like, wow, I like Bundaberg, this is incredible. Everyone's got margin in their lives. No one's anxious or tense here at all, right? So you know what it's like when you're running late for something? And all of these things happen, right? You get increasingly tense. You start to think, oh no, we're going to be late. It's going to be the end of the world. If we don't get the lights down on the main street, when we've got to turn right there, we're going to be stuck there for at least 3 more minutes and we're never going to make it. It's going to be the end of our day right then. And what happens is your heart rate goes up and you start to get sweaty. You get the skin conductance sensors and they can measure all this moisture dripping out of the ends of your fingertips and running down your back and all that sort of stuff. And that's kind of what anxiety is. From a technical point of view, my definition of anxiety is a little bit different to that. Anxiety is just being worried, fearful, apprehensive about some future event. Have you noticed that kids get really anxious when there's an exam? Like grade 3, the night before NAPLAN. And they're so stressed. I'm so glad a few of you are shaking your head and going, no, definitely not. Because please, if there is any exam in the history of Australia that matters not one iota, it's NAPLAN. It's the least consequential test your kids will ever do. It's not reliable, it's not valid, and it doesn't tell us anything meaningful about your kids' intelligence or their capability at school. Why? Because they do it in May and they get the results in October and November, and by golly, there's a lot of stuff that's happened between those 2 dates. Putting pressure on the kids about NAPLAN's terrible. Just don't do it. I might get in trouble with the teachers here. That's why I'm not looking at them right now. NAPLAN is important to schools and NAPLAN is important to the government, but in terms of your kids' well-being, it's not important. They don't need to study for it. You know how you can buy the study tests down at the newsagent? It's not important. And when they get anxious, they're just worried, what if I don't do well? And every now and again, so like report cards coming out in the next week or 2, right? And every now and again, I'll hear from a child who will say something like, oh, I'm really nervous because if I don't do well, I'm not going to get this thing. And the rewards, the higher the stakes, the more we raise anxiety. And our 8-year-olds don't need to be worried about that stuff. Frankly, neither do our 15-year-olds. I'd even argue that our 17-year-olds don't. So anxiety is this fear or this apprehension or this worry about what's coming in the future. The difficulty is that when it comes to proper anxiety disorders, our kids are always worried about something, and often it's indefinable. Like they don't actually know what it is, they're just worried. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. I think that would be inappropriate in a conversation like this. I'm not an anxious person, but I had my first experience with anxiety a few years ago, pre-COVID, I was flying into Sydney for a really important meeting with what was going to be one of the biggest clients I'd ever dealt with. I was pretty nervous. In fact, you could say that I was genuinely anxious. But I had done all of my appropriate preparation. I was so ready for this. I flew into Sydney early, like 2 hours early. I jumped on the train from the airport straight into Martin Place. The train's the most reliable, the fastest, the most hassle-free way to get there, and my timetable had me arriving about an hour 20 before the meeting. Like, I was fine. Even so, I was nervous as I got on the train and headed into town because I knew that I was only a couple of hours away from this big meeting, and I could feel the anxiety. My heart was beating, and I was a little bit dry and gummy in the mouth. Like, you know that anxious feeling? Did I have an anxiety disorder? No, of course not, but I was feeling anxious. Anyway, as we left the final station before Martin Place, this is when we're now underground, underneath the CBD of Sydney. I can't remember what the station was, but whatever it was, we pulled out, and we'd been travelling for a minute or so, and then the train stopped underground, just came to a slow, patient stop. I kind of was like, oh, it must be a red light. Underground. And after about 3 or 4 minutes of not moving, I thought, no other trains have gone past us. It's a long red light. I might just check Twitter and see if anything's going on. Because, like Twitter, everyone tells you about everything instantly. So I'm typing in Sydney trains and Sydney, and I couldn't find anything. And then my mind started to do what psychologists call catastrophizing. I started to wonder, hang on, we've now been stopped for about 5 minutes. We haven't moved. Well, what's going on? Why haven't we moved? And have you noticed that in those moments, your mind doesn't usually say, oh, it's probably just track work. In those moments, you start to think devastatingly scarily about Lent cafe bombings and September 11 buildings. And that's where my mind went. And I've got a PhD in psychology. I know that this is ridiculous. There's nothing on Twitter. No one around me is looking worried. And I'm going through all of this in my mind saying, it's okay. And yet, the anxiety just kept on building and building and building. After about 10 minutes of not moving, literally stuck in the one spot, I could literally feel the sweat running down my back. Now, I'm not a perspirer at all. And I thought to myself, this is out of control. Justin, you're not being sensible. You know nothing's going on. Then I looked to my left and I noticed that there was a guy standing beside me who was wearing a Sydney Trains jacket. And I thought, he must work for the trains. I'll ask him. So I took my headphones off because I had my big sound cancelling headphones. And I said to him, excuse me. And he looked at me like I was an axe murderer because people don't talk to each other on Sydney trains. Like, what do you want? And I said, you work for the trains? He nodded his head. I said, I don't mean to be rude, but we've been stopped here for what seems like a really long time. Is everything okay? He looked at me like I was literally from another planet and goes, yeah? I said, are you sure? Are you really sure? And he said, yeah, I'm sure. So I sat out of his pocket and went, they're just doing some track work. And I said, okay, great, thank you. Put my headphones back on. Now that should have calmed me, right? Now that I've got someone from Sydney Trains telling me that there's just some track work and it's going to be another few minutes and that'll be fine, I should have been okay. But the brain does this horrible thing to us when we're in that state. It just keeps on, if I can extend a terrible metaphor now, pushing us along the tracks. Except the tracks weren't moving, or the train wasn't moving on the track, it was just my mind that was. We didn't end up moving for over 20 minutes, and by the end of the 20 minutes, I had drafted a text message to my wife, telling her that I loved her eternally, and that I miss her so much, and that if anything does happen to me, tell the kid. Like I was typing this message to her, and again, even standing here telling you this, I know some of you are probably thinking, this guy's nuts, why am I listening to him? Like, is this guy on drugs or something? Like, They paid for him to be here. I recognise how literally insane it sounds. And while it was happening, I could see it happening. It was like I could step out of myself and watch it and go, what are you doing? You're nuts. There's still nothing on Twitter. I've almost finished the text message telling my wife it was lovely knowing her. And then the train starts to move. And I'm like, oh, hallelujah. I'm waiting for the angels to start singing. We moved 10 metres and then we stopped again. At which point I almost burst into tears. And I started to look for exits. There has to be some way off this train. Now, I know that I sound dramatic. I know how it sounds. And in the safety of this space and with my head back on and my sanity working, and yet in that moment, I was absolutely overcome with a panic attack, with heightened anxiety that made me dysfunctional and irrational. How I was able to not cry out, to not do something crazy, I still don't quite know. But eventually, after something like 25, 28 minutes, some interminable amount of time, the train got moving and it went into Martin Place, and I got off the train and I walked up the stairs and the sun was still shining and all the buildings were there and no one was aware of what had happened inside me except for me. And I was about, 40 minutes early for my meeting. There was no need for the anxiety. Now, if you haven't experienced anxiety before, I share that with you to highlight that that's how it feels to have anxiety. The thing is, it's not just how it feels once every 40 plus years when you're on a train in Sydney and things don't go right. It's how it feels more days than not. And if you've got a child who's truly suffering from anxiety, that's how they wake up. In fact, if you suffer from anxiety, maybe that's how you wake up. And you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's wrong. You don't know where it's going to happen, who it's going to happen to. You just know. And you also know that it's ridiculous, it's irrational, and it doesn't belong in your head or in your world. But it's there. And for some reason, you can't get rid of it. That's how anxiety feels. It's like your brain is an anchor attached to concrete, tied around your ankle, and you've just been thrown off a jetty. And you're actually holding the key, but for some reason you can't reach down and unlock it and swim to the surface, and it just keeps dragging you down. Now again, I'm not talking about that kind of anxiety for the majority of tonight, but this is what anxiety feels like. And even if your kids aren't dealing with that or you're not dealing with that, they still get anxious and worried and feel like everything's going to be wrong. The exam, I'm going to fail the exam. I'm going to lose all my friends if I don't go to the party, or if I don't have a phone, or if I can't have TikTok, or if I'm not allowed to play Fortnite. And it builds and builds and builds and builds. And then they become explosive. They become out of control, especially when there's a little 5-letter acronym that I use. Just think of a German police officer who tells you to stop. What's the word that they use? Halt. Add an S on the end. HALTS. Hungry, angry, lonely, tired, stressed. You get any of those 5 things on their own, or 5 of them together, and what you find is that anxiety goes through the roof, willpower drops, and all of a sudden your kids are just hard to deal with. Here's what research tells us. If somebody's feeling anxious, whether they have anxiety or not, if you're feeling anxious, you're drawn to threatening information. And if you're not sure what that really means, think back to the very beginnings of COVID. Let's go back 15 months, 16 months. Remember when Australian news media, towards the end of March of last year, started saying COVID is everywhere and it's airborne, and if you touch a petrol bowser, you could catch COVID if somebody had it before you. And do you remember how we were just glued to news.com.au or abc.net.au or wherever it is that you go to get your news? Do you remember how we were just sucked in? Because the news media preys on this, right? And they tell us all the stuff that is threatening because it raises our anxiety and it draws us in and we have to stare at it. Once your anxiety is high, you start to notice everything else that's threatening as well. You have this heightened receptivity to anxiety-inducing information. What you also do when you're anxious is you tend to dwell on threatening information longer. So if you're sitting here and you're not an anxious person at all, even if COVID was happening all around you, you'd be like, it'll be right. Because that's what people who don't have anxiety do. It'll be fine, don't worry about it. People who are laid back, cruisy, their emotions aren't up here with anxiety and fear and apprehension about the future, they're like, it'll be fine. You know people like that? How annoying are they? You're like, no, but we need to worry about this. This one is serious. And again, what you do when you find out that there's something threatening in the environment is not only are you drawn to threatening information, but then you spend the next 4 hours Googling everything you can about it. Because you've got to know everything so that you're prepared. And our kids do this as well, by the way. Before I go on, our kids do this as well. Let's say that there's a little bit of a spat happening in a friendship group at school. We've got a couple of 9-year-old girls, and they were besties, but something happened, maybe on the handball court. Because, golly, doesn't handball get the emotions up? We're talking about serious issues tonight. I've got a PhD in psychology. My kids are really, really well balanced. They're actually pretty good. But a couple of years ago, one of them was just, her anxiety was off the scale. And there was nothing that I could do about it. No conversation, no work that I did with her at all, because I'm her dad, right? So we made the decision for the first time in our lives to send a child of ours to a psychologist. It's not that we don't trust psychologists, but we just haven't needed to send our kids to psychologists. They've been great. And after the third meeting, the psychologist said, "It's handball." I'm like, I paid how many hundreds of dollars so that you could tell me that? Anyway. But let's say you've got these two kids, they're 9 years old, and they're having this big fight about handball. Or maybe you've got a couple of boys in grade 9, and they're kind of at each other. And you know what happens in the schoolyard? Somebody says something. There's a little bit of threat. Maybe, I'm sure it doesn't happen in Bundaberg. It's kind of a 1980s thing, 1990s thing, but maybe one of the boys says, "I'm going to smash him after school behind the toilets." And so what happens is there's this threatening information, and humans are already drawn to that anyway, but the boy who's being threatened is particularly drawn to it, and so are his friends. Or the girl who's having this fight with her bestie about the handball dilemma, or the fact that they're both... do they say that they're shipping? They're shipping her with him? Is that, yeah? Some of you are saying no, and some are saying yes. So shipping is like they're crushing on them and they want to match up. That's the big word that the kids are using at the moment. So like Jenny's shipping Mark. That's kind of like Jenny's got a crush on Mark, and they don't say shipping here. New words every year. Yeah, okay. So shipping's the thing at the moment. And what happens is, what do the kids do if there's something negative going on? They're sucked right into the vortex of it, aren't they? And then they start to interpret anything that could be ambiguous, anything that's even non-threatening, in a really threatening way. Something that's completely unrelated suddenly is, "Are you talking about me?" And it's not in a threatening, "Are you talking about me?" It's like, "I'm panicking. Are they talking about me?" As soon as you see two people over there who are whispering and giggling, and one of them glances in your direction, you're like, "Oh, those dirty cows. They're talking about me behind my back." And then, well, do I go on top? How do I deal with this situation? And the anxiety goes up again and again and again. And then, it's just so hard to ignore it. You can't shut it off. It won't leave you alone. And as a result, we've got this negative expectation. And it just keeps on piling up because there's so much evidence. When you're looking for it, it's so easy to find. It's kind of like when you're about to buy a new car and then you see everyone's driving that car. Because once you start noticing it, it's everywhere. And that's what happens with anxiety. Once you start noticing stuff to be worried about, once you start noticing that there's fearful stuff in the environment, things to be worried about, they keep on coming. Now let's have a look at what's happening data-wise in Australia. We're going to look at some trends. This is from Academic Pediatrics. It was published, when was it? Just a couple of years ago. And this is what the data is telling us here in Australia. If we have a look up here, you can see that anxiety disorders, we've got across the board, around about 8% of Aussie kids aged 4 to 11 have an anxiety disorder. Please also note the date of this data, 2013-2014. Why is it so old? Because it's just really hard to get current data and to get it published, and that's how old it is. I haven't been able to find any peer-reviewed data that's more up to date. I've found some non-peer-reviewed data, which I'll go through shortly, but the very best peer-reviewed data shows this. Now, we've got pretty good evidence or pretty good suggestions in non-peer-reviewed data that it's probably a little bit higher because over the last 10 years, things haven't exactly improved. In fact, just some data that came out in the last 2 months about COVID. COVID has absolutely pushed these numbers higher, not just for kids aged 4 to 11, but across the board. And the people who have been most significantly affected, those who have been through the most lockdowns. So Victoria and Perth, that's where we see the worst mental health outcomes. It's, I'm not being political here, and I'm not an epidemiologist. I don't really care which government's in. I'm not interested in politics. What I will say, though, is that when we have this focus on zero COVID transmission, and we lock down every time there's a COVID case because, oh my goodness, we can't have COVID in the community, which I understand is a serious thing, there's a whole lot of data that the newspapers are excited about, and that's COVID data. But there's a whole lot of other data that doesn't get reported in the news. And the costs of that are extraordinary. I had a conversation with someone from Kids Helpline just the other day. It's going to be on my podcast on Thursday morning. In Victoria, their calls, Kids Helpline, have a mandatory reporting rule. If they hear something that's really serious, they have to report it. And their calls to emergency services for children and adolescents who are making suicide plans have gone up more than 184% in the December to May 6 months of this year compared to last year. Victoria is the hardest hit. Why? Because they've got one particular thing going on that the rest of the country doesn't. That is that they're locking down consistently because of COVID. Again, I'm not saying it's right or wrong to lock down. I'm saying that when we do this sort of stuff to our kids, there are side effects that don't get reported in the media. Here's another graph for you. Mental illness among children aged 4 to 11 by family type and functioning. Now, this is an uncomfortable reality. I don't share it to make anyone feel guilty. There's no shame associated with this. These are simply figures. Okay, and what the figures show is that the kids who have the highest, the families, what am I trying to say? The places where there's the greatest levels of mental illness tend not to be in families where both parents or carers are available to their children. In two-parent or two-carer families, the kids do the best. In single-parent families, the kids seem to struggle the most, and when blended families are in existence, they also struggle the most. Now, it doesn't take a psychologist to understand what's going on here. Family conflict and separation, and then blending and starting again, it casts a long shadow into the lives of kids. And so if you're in that situation, this doesn't say this will happen to your kids. It says that the risk is higher, which means that if you're in that situation, even though you've probably got less resources and you've probably got more stress and life is so much harder than it is for couples that have got it together and are living their best lives, there's just so much extra pressure on you to try to change that. And we're going to talk about how you can do that in a way that doesn't feel pressured. Because I don't want you to feel pressure tonight. I don't want you to feel hopeless and helpless and think, oh my goodness, it's all too hard. This is from Mission Australia, so this is not peer-reviewed. This is just a big survey that Mission Australia does with the Black Dog Institute. And their latest mental health report youth survey that's tabulated like this, they've got more recent ones, but they're not collecting the same data, so I can't give you the more recent data. It's not as usefully collected. What they've shown, if you have a look at the way that mental health changes from 2012 to 2016, you can see among 15-year-olds, it's gone from 17, and then it's sort of stabilised around 20. For 16-year-olds, it's definitely going up. For 17-year-olds, it's going up even more, and for 18-year-olds, well, that's through the roof. And you'll also note that as kids get older, it gets worse. It doesn't matter where we look, in what research, we see a consistent increase in mental illness as kids get older. We also know that 50% of all mental illness in adults starts during childhood and adolescence. And so much of it is around this anxiety stuff. All right, last one. This is prevalence of mental disorders among young people aged 12 to 17 by sex. And what we can see there is that, gee, it's hard to read that, isn't it? Sorry, I can't read it either. I'm going to crouch down here because I haven't memorised it. Oh gosh, it's even smaller here. Anxiety disorders, males 6.3, females 7.7. We're talking about percentages. ADHD, males 9.8, females 2.7. Spot the difference. Major depressive disorder, males 4.3, females 5.8. Conduct disorder, males 2.6, females 1.6. Any mental disorder, males 15.9, females 12.8. And so we see that the mood disorders seem to affect, we call these internalizing disorders, the stuff that gets pushed inside, depression and anxiety, that seems to affect girls more. Whereas the externalizing stuff, the ADHD, the conduct disorder, seems to affect boys more. Isn't that curious? Anyone got any ideas why? Why is there a gender difference? Why do girls internalise and boys externalise? Yep. Sorry, a little louder? Girls mask better. Yeah, probably, but why? But if you pop up your hand, I would love to, yeah.
Has it got to do with gender stereotyping?
Has it got to do with gender stereotyping? Let's explore that a bit. What's the stereotype for girls?
I guess, it was always, not always okay as such, but boys are seeing more as like that if you've got feelings, let it out type thing, and females not so much.
So the idea is that boys are supposed to get their feelings out. And how do boys generally get their feelings out? Anger, yeah, anger, aggression. Boys don't get their feelings out by saying, oh, Dan, I'm having a really hard time. I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed, and I just thought I'd cry on your shoulder for a minute. Do you think we could sit down and... Everyone in the room is sort of chuckling at me right now, but why? Why have we got this unhealthy idea that it's not okay for a guy to say, I'm having a really hard time right now. I'm really struggling. Things are tough. British cultural heritage. It happens in America as well. Maybe that's British cultural heritage as well, if you go back far enough, I guess. But there's this masculine stereotype, and the female stereotype is that you're supposed to be people pleasers. I mean, how unhealthy is this? And therefore, I need to hide, mask, keep it all away. We could go into this a whole lot deeper. We don't have time for that tonight. But I guess the main point that I want to highlight is that the way we approach emotions is dreadfully unhealthy in our society, in our community. We approach emotions so poorly. In fact, we have got, I would say, a really impoverished emotional vocabulary. Like, if I asked anyone how they were feeling, well, actually, let me just, first answer that comes to your mind, what's your name? Trent, how are you feeling? Pretty good. Pretty good. Thank you, Trent. Appreciate it. Can I ask, what's your name? Janine, how are you feeling? Yeah, good, fine. Okay. What's your name? Chris, how are you feeling? Good. Do you get what I'm saying? How many words am I getting from you? One. What's the word? Fine, good. Anyone seen Carl Barron? How you going? Yeah, not bad. What have you been up to? Yeah, not much. We're really good at saying what we're not, and not very good at saying what we are. When you're having a hard time, how do you go expressing those feelings in productive, constructive ways to somebody that you trust? I'm going to share something a little bit sad with you. On Friday, my beloved dog, Benson, had him for a little over 10 years, died. I was so sad. I miss him. I didn't really like him very much most of the time. He barked, he upset the neighbours, he tore up the garden, he would steal food. I remember one night I was cooking a barbecue and he literally took 12 steaks off the plate. Every now and again he'd pee inside. He was a really, really, really annoying dog. But he was loyal and he was good. And over the last couple of days, every time I've driven in the driveway, he hasn't been standing at the garage door wagging his tail to greet me. And I feel lonely without him. I feel a little bit lost. I kind of feel stuck, and I really miss him a lot. And that's not the most eloquent way to pay homage to my dog. But I use that in contrast to a friend of mine who lost his dog about 3 weeks ago. And I said, Craig, how you doing? He said, yeah, it sucks. And I said, what sucks? Just sucks. I said, you really miss the dog, don't you? He said, yeah. And then we started talking about something else. When we don't get the opportunity to experience our emotions, when our kids don't get the chance to experience their emotions, what they learn is that their emotions don't matter, or that their emotions are wrong, or that their emotions are inconvenient. And I could go on. But if you're a kid and you start having an emotion and you know that stuff, what do you start to feel about your emotion? What have you got to do to it? You've got to shut it down. In fact, what do we say to our kids when they're getting emotional? Hang on. Not all at once. This is exciting. So I've got this presentation up here, but I kind of keep on forgetting about the presentation because I reckon I do some of my best thinking when I'm talking, and I like to learn with you. So can I get you to talk for 60 seconds with the person next to you or the people around you, and just, now you might be enlightened and brilliant, and if you are, that's fantastic, but let's just talk about that question for a sec. What do you do when your kids start having a big emotion? What's your standard response? Standard, not best response, standard. And if you are that good that you always have brilliant responses, just think about what your sister-in-law says when her kids are having big emotions. Okay? 60 seconds, and then I want to get your feedback. Away you go. Okay, 15 seconds to go. 15 seconds. Alrighty, come on back to the front for me. Thanks, everyone. I'll get you to wrap that one up. Okay. So what do we normally say when the kids start having these big emotions? Especially emotions like anxiety. Yeah.
So we were just discussing how we might automatically say, look, you'll be right, move on. But because our other halves might go, you'll be right, so right, move on, then you, like, as the wife, you tend to go the other way and go, and share.
So you become a bit, yeah, compensatory, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it does. It does. How you feeling, man? Okay. All right. So, don't worry, you'll be right. Don't worry, you'll be right. Imagine you're scared of flying. You're anxious. You're going to board the plane. And you look scared. You sit down in your seat, put the seatbelt on, cabin crew come past, they look at you and say, "You okay?" Because you're white. And you look at them and say, "Actually, no, I'm not. I am really terrified of aeroplanes." They look at you and they say, "Don't worry, sweetheart, you'll be right." Do you look at them and say, "Good point, I'm overdoing it. I know I'm being irrational, thanks for reassuring me." Let's say they added some additional reassurance. "You know what, the pilot's never crashed." So far, so good. Now you're feeling, is your anxiety dropping now? No. Now we'll talk about what to do shortly, but isn't it funny that that's our most common response when the kids tell us they're anxious? Okay, what else did you talk about in your conversations other than "you'll be right"? Yeah.
It's okay to be upset, but it's not okay to punch your sister.
Okay. It's okay to be upset, but it's not okay to punch your sister, was the answer for those of you that missed it. I think that's reasonable. As parents, we've got to have some limits. Yeah. So what you're talking about here is actually validating the emotion. And what you're saying is technically right. But I think that when we get into this formulaic script, where we say, it's okay to be upset, but it's not okay to do that, the kids kind of know that it's a script. And when they know that it's a script, it doesn't usually make them feel particularly seen, heard, or valued. They feel like you're just going through the motions because here I am, I'm having an anxiety moment, and now you've got to say this thing again. And so what you're saying, again, is technically accurate. But I wonder if we can do better with that. That's what we'll talk about shortly. Okay, what else do we say in this moment? Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Yeah. And how do we normally say calm down? Just a show of hands, if you don't mind. Not yet. No, don't. All right. So thanks for your enthusiasm, but how many of you have children who, when you said, "Would you just calm down?" How many of you have children who have looked at you and said, "Okay"? No hands. Oh, there's always one. All right, fine. Doesn't work. Why? Because you're not calm. Emotions are contagious. And your kids will catch your cranky and your chaos on your cranky and crazy. But they'll also catch your calm. And I wonder if you were to walk into the room and say, guys, let's just be calm for a sec. I'm here. I wonder if that might be different too. Would you just calm down? It's kind of like, would you all just be quiet? Be quiet. Be quiet. I've actually watched one mum, and I'm not trying to shame this mum. Okay, this is a shame-free environment. We're having a bit of a laugh, but it's also got a serious side. This mum walked over to a child who had just whacked a sibling and said, "We don't hit in this house." Really? What message is this kid getting? I've got another hand over here. One more time, sorry? Breathe. Breathe. Yeah. Yeah. Breathing is amazing. No, I'm serious. Okay, stating the obvious. I went to university, so I can say that. Breathing is amazing for helping to deal with anxiety. One of the great challenges that we have, of course, is that when somebody's feeling really anxious, the last thing they want to do is breathe. And when you tell them to breathe, what do they normally say? "I am breathing. Damn it, leave me alone." I'm breathing really. They're not breathing the way they need to. And we can instill good habits, but we need to remember that under pressure, and anxiety is pressure, we revert to our most practiced habit. So what habit are your kids practicing when they get anxious? And can we help them to practice better habits when they're anxious so that as that pressure rises, they have better breathing, for example? Yeah, thank you. Okay, are there any other answers to yeah, thank you. Yeah, let's kick it down the road. Yeah. Now, this is this is both a terrible technique and a terrific technique. It really depends on the situation. Sometimes, well, we're going to talk about this more shortly, but I'll preview it very quickly, and I shared this with the staff this afternoon as well. High emotions, low intelligence. High emotions, low intelligence. When somebody is super anxious, super stressed, super pressured, super apprehensive, worried, fearful, you can't actually get through to them sometimes. Have you noticed that? And no matter what you do or say, they're just, poof, they're gone. Their intelligence has left the building. Our job, therefore, is to try to help them to bring their emotions back down so that their intelligence can come up and then we can have the conversation. So sometimes, if the anxiety isn't too high, we can actually deal with it on the spot. And other times, there's just no way it can be done. And so dealing with it later is the best way to do it. I guess the real question becomes, in your mind as a parent, are you dealing with it later because you can't be bothered dealing with it now? Because, oh, for crying out loud, here we go again. Or are you dealing with it later because of what I would call masterful inactivity? You're making a conscious choice right now to not deal with it because now's not the time. But maybe you're setting an appointment with your child and saying, I can see how hard this is. Let's work through this and we'll deal with it later. You don't have to deal with it right now. We'll deal with it later. Well, we could play with this for a while, but I think we should move on. How do you recognize anxiety? Let's just get some answers from the group first, and then I'll dive into a few things that I've got up here. How do you recognize anxiety in yourself? What do you notice, Dan? Short temper. Have you noticed that? Because under pressure, you revert to your most practiced habit. And as a male, stereotypical, but there's enough evidence to support this, our habit when we're under pressure is that we become explosive. We get angry. You know where anger comes from? It's actually what's called a secondary emotion. And our kids do the same thing as us. If anger is a secondary emotion, that means that there's a primary emotion underneath it. But because we're so impoverished emotionally, we don't recognize the emotion underneath it. An emotion like anger usually comes from, not always, there are additional ones, but the primary ones are fear and sadness. We see anger in parents mostly out of fear. Oh, there's another place that it can come from, that's a feeling of being out of control. But I want to talk about this for just a sec. Let's say you've got a 15-year-old, and I know that we've got a big spread of ages, so I'm just picking 15. This may apply to you in a different context. A 15-year-old who has just been caught by the police joyriding on a Friday night when you thought that they were in bed, but they actually snuck out, went to the party, stole somebody's car with their friends, and they were sitting in the back seat while their friend was joyriding around town. And now the police have called you to come down to the cop shop to pick up your 15-year-old. You're going to be angry? like, let's be honest. I know everyone's sitting there going, no, I wouldn't be angry. I'd be really garbage. You're going to be mad, right? I mean, what do you think you're doing? And most parents are going to be angry. Some of you might not be because you're that chilled parent, and I commend you. I wish we could all be a bit more like that. But are we actually angry? I'm going to argue that no way are we actually angry. What we are is terrified. We are absolutely scared out of our brain. And so we say to our child, what were you thinking? I swear I'm drowning you until you're 94. You're going to stay in your bedroom and you can just eat scraps and leftovers. The dog's going to eat better than you from now on. I've had enough. You're never getting a job. I'm done. I can't take it. But what you're really saying in the most clumsy way is, you scared me so much. I couldn't handle it if something happened to you. I'm terrified, and I don't know what to do. So here's the thing. When we blow up at our kids, do they look at us and say, well, now that you're really angry, I guess I should listen a bit better. I can tell that you're really scared deep down. Our anger ruptures the relationship that we have with them, doesn't it? Pushes them away. From an anxiety point of view, we get angry at them and say, for goodness sakes, you have to go to school. I'm not going to put up with this school refusal anymore. I've had enough of it. You've done it 4 days in the last 2 weeks. I'm paying school fees. You're going to fall behind in your education. It looks like we don't know what's going on in this family, and you're having these fits, and I've had enough. Because as parents, sometimes we crack. And our kids, what do they think at that point? You don't understand. You have no idea what it's like to be me. And by the way, what child has ever said, well, now that you've made me feel so bad about life, yes, I'm motivated, I'm going to get up and make it happen. Wow, that pep talk really got me going. But imagine what it would sound like if we actually had the emotional wherewithal to say, I'm really scared. Because over the last 2 weeks, you haven't been to school 4 days. And I'm scared because I don't know what's going on with you. And I'm scared because I'm worried for you. And I'm scared because I don't know how to help you. And as your mum or as your dad, you're pretty much the most important human in my life. And I'm just so stuck. What does a conversation like that do for your child in that moment? Does your child look at you and say, oh, toughen up, mum. Get over yourself, fair dinkum. I have a feeling that if we can express more effectively what we're truly feeling, our fear or our own anxiety or our own stress or sadness, that we actually draw our children to us. Does that make sense? They don't see us as parents anymore, they see us as humans. Because kids forget that parents are people too. How else do you recognise it? In yourself. Yeah, thank you, gentleman at the back. I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, yes. Yeah, so we get these physiological symptoms. Get headaches, get stomach aches, get any kind of ache that stops me having to go to work or school or confront what it is. Yeah, what else? Thank you. Insomnia, can't sleep. Or alternatively, sleep too much. Cannot get out of bed, can't bring myself to do it. There's a hand in here somewhere. You were going to say sleep, what else? Thank you, up the back. Cleaning. I don't know too many teenagers that respond to anxiety with cleaning. Yeah, I know. I just wanted to bring it into the other context, and maybe for some. In fact, you know, there's probably some teenagers who do. There was another hand that came up in here just at the same time. Okay, I've got 1, 2, 3. Yep. Crying. Yeah, big emotions. Cold feeling, shaking. And so that's that physiological again. And where was it? Oh, yeah. Stress eating. Yeah. Or, again, going in the other direction, totally off my food completely. Last one.
Whole physiological, you've addressed too much adrenaline dump, you then burn blood glucose, and then this is what happens. So you stay in that realm of too much adrenaline within your blood system, so you're burning blood glucose all the time. So these are the different feelings those particular people will have when they have low blood glucose level. Do you go into that? Like, because that's potentially is the issue with these different people. So they feel exhausted because they have no blood glucose level and it starts stripping.
Yeah, so then there'll normally be a big crash, right? So they
So
they
they
get...
have a sore tummy because their body can't produce enough blood sugar. They've got nothing in their body to convert to blood glucose.
Okay, so what you're saying is a fraction aside, a step to the side of where my expertise is. So I'm
So it's adrenaline burn.
okay.
So that first symptom
Yep.
or that primary problem, fear or whatever, creates a lot of burning adrenaline.
Yep. So they kind of become hyperactive, very, very, very active, lots of adrenaline, and then there's a big crash.
Yeah.
Sure.
So their blood glucose level is dropped.
Right, okay.
And potentially blood pressure.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Anxiety shows up in these ways as well. School refusal. Don't want to go. Anger, we've already talked about that. There's the catastrophizing, but what if this happens? And have you ever noticed that if you're dealing with a child who's anxious, and they say, yeah, but what if this happens? And you say, well, and then you give them an answer, and they say, yeah, but what if this happens? Or what if that happens and then this happens instead? And you can never get to the end of the what ifs. There's always another one. There's tears when you talk about what's going on, and I don't know what's going on. We've got, you know the thing where they're, oh, but I can't walk. I know it's funny, right? But it's not when they're dealing with it. Or everything hurts. Everything hurts. My arms hurt, my legs hurt, everything hurts. They can't sleep, we've talked about that. Jittery and bouncy, sore tummy and physiological stuff, feeling sick and being really clingy. So where's it coming from? Where's it actually coming from? Anxiety comes from a range of places. I'm going to spend a few minutes just chatting with you about what I've got up here, and then depending on how we're going for time, no, we're not going to stop and get your feedback. I've just realised we're having too much fun and we need to move it on. So where's it coming from? First of all, avoidance reinforces anxiety. Now, what I'm saying here is kind of provocative. But let me explain where I'm coming from, and we'll play with it. And by the way, if I say anything over these next few minutes that you want to push back against, I love it. I love it when people push back or say, well, hang on, but what about this? So please feel free to put up your hand and interrupt me and tell me why you have an opinion that might be different to what I'm sharing. Okay? So avoidance reinforces anxiety. You know when you've got a child who says, I don't want to do this, and you say, it's okay, kiddo, you don't have to do it. And so what's just happened is that they're anxious about something, and now they're avoiding it, and you're allowing them to avoid it, which actually makes them feel safe and comfortable, which reinforces the idea that this is where I want to be, and that's not where I want to be, and I've been allowed to stay here, and it feels really good. And the more I avoid it, the more I reinforce the actual thing that's making me anxious. Yeah? So this quote here from Alison Gopnik, who has written an amazing book about parenting, and the title of it just, the nursery, the gardener, so the two kinds of parent, the gardener and something else. It's great. Just Google her. It's a great book. She says, by shielding children from every possible risk, we may lead them to react with exaggerated fear to situations that aren't risky at all and isolate them from the adult skills that they will one day have to master. So does this therefore mean that what we should be doing is we should be making our kids do stuff that they don't want to do so they don't suffer from anxiety? It's a really fine line, because my answer has to be no. Like, I'm hoping to take my kids to New Zealand soon, although we've just discovered that it's almost impossible to get flights over there because it's one of the only places that you can go on a holiday, and it's going to cost us like $1 bajillion to catch a plane over there. But I'm hoping to take them to New Zealand, and we're going to go to Queenstown if we can get there, and my intention is to bungee jump. I've never done it, and I think that it would just be wild. I can't wait. But if my kids are anxious about bungee jumping, should I tell them, toughen up? Come on, I mean, if you don't do it now, all you're going to do is reinforce the anxiety about jumping off high things with elastics around you. So there's got to be a place where you say, your reluctance to do this is reasonable and developmentally appropriate, and I'm not going to make you do it. I'm not going to make my kids bungee jump. I have one daughter. I've taught 4 kids to drive now, 3 of my own and one of my kids' friends. And I've taught them all in a manual except for one of my kids. She just had this overwhelming anxiety around driving the manual. And after about 10 hours trying to get her to do it, I just thought to myself, she can live a fully functional adult life without being able to drive a manual vehicle. It's not worth the anxiety. Because the anxiety was so great that she didn't even want to get in the car with me. The anxiety was so great that she didn't even want to drive, even in the auto, because driving was that anxiety-inducing for her. So I think we've got to be careful about whether we push or whether we hold back. Yeah.
Justin, I think that surely there's a difference between pushing the envelope and doing something every day that they feel a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That's a good energy between to do something a little bit uncomfortable. All of us to do something a little bit uncomfortable every day.
Who thinks that's a reasonable thing? It's good for kids to do things that make them uncomfortable. My hand is up high. Totally agree. And I'm right with you. Bungee jumping, or you pick it. But as parents, we know our kids, and we've kind of got to work out what it is. So for all of my other kids, I can tell you right now that they'll drive manuals. But this child, she is just a little bit, personality-wise and temperament-wise, she's just a little bit different to the other ones, and driving the manual was a bridge too far for her, and I was fine to pull it back. But for the others, they'll be fine. The really interesting thing about your comment is that as parents, we're very uncomfortable with our children being uncomfortable. Have you noticed that? Like when the kids are uncomfortable, what do you usually want to go and do? Got to go and give them a big hug and rescue them and wrap them in cotton wool and saying, "You'll be okay, sweetheart. I'll look after you." And that's natural, and we get a gold star as parents for doing that. We're protecting them. We're making sure that they're safe. Except Gopnik's quote. We're reinforcing, avoidance reinforces anxiety. We're reinforcing the very discomfort that they're trying to avoid, which means that they'll never get used to being uncomfortable. Yeah. Yeah. What a wonderful question. Let me restate that for the people who are watching at home and for those who couldn't quite hear. So if you've got a child who is really introverted, maybe a bit socially uncomfortable, doesn't like engaging person to person, at what point do you stop encouraging them to talk to the teacher or to go up to friends and engage with them? How do we do that? And there's no perfect answer for a question like that. What we're looking for is a couple of things. Are they able to function, or is it interfering with their capacity to function? If it's interfering with normal, healthy development, if it's interfering with functionality, then we definitely need to be giving them a bit of a nudge. But so Susan Cain wrote a book a couple of years ago called Quiet. The book Quiet is about those kids who are just, they don't like people. Definition of an introvert. An introvert is somebody who is exhausted by people. An extrovert is somebody who is energized by people. Guess what I am? I love you all. I'm so excited you're here. Like, I'm a 10 out of 10 extrovert. I'm just enlivened by people. But you might have a 1 out of 10 extrovert. You might have a 10 out of 10 introvert. And if that's what you're dealing with, then expecting them to be, they still can be vibrant and engaged and make eye contact and have conversations and give a talk in front of the class. They still can. It's just that it depletes them. They have to work themselves up to it. Once they've done it, they're like, I need a good lay down. Does that mean that they should never have to do it? No, I don't think so, because in a society like ours, it's a necessary element of functioning. But what we do instead is we work out ways that we can support them through it, and we talk to them about sometimes life's uncomfortable. And we get used to the idea of being uncomfortable. Unfortunately for a lot of us, there's this idea that what doesn't kill you makes you weaker. In other words, a lot of us look at our kids and think, oh my goodness, you're really terrified of this, and this is going to be really hard for you, and if you do it, it's going to weaken you. So we have a saying in our home. So I love to ride my bicycle. I'm a road cyclist. I wear the Lycra. I liked you all until right then. I don't have any hair on my legs. Was that too much information? Did I just go too far? Dan's just gone, oh. And I used to compete. I took my cycling very, very seriously. I was a member of a cycling club, and I'd go and race on the weekend. And what I have taught my kids is if I want to be a strong bike racer, what do I do when I see a hill? Do I ride up it or do I ride down it? I've got to ride up it. Because it's riding up the hills, giving me something to push against that makes me strong. In our home, we have a phrase, you've got to love the hills, because the hills make you strong. What doesn't kill you will typically make you stronger. But we've got to do it with wisdom. And we can't just say to our kids, you know what, I know you're scared of school, I know you don't like talking to people, get out there and do it, it's going to toughen you up, it's going to make you strong. That's not helpful. That makes them feel incompetent and scared, and it makes it feel like you don't understand. And we need to talk about how we can help them through that. Let me just move past here because timing. Number 2, Black Hawk Down. Helicopter parenting. Why are kids anxious? Because parents are so invested in their children, because we're having fewer kids, and because we're investing more resources in them. Here's what some research shows. This is a meta-analysis, which is like a big study of a whole lot of studies. And this is looking at the relationship between overprotective parenting and anxiety. Okay? That's what it looks like. Does that mean that we should be permissive and laissez-faire and say, hey kids, do whatever you want? I know you're only 3, but the park is safe. Just go for your life. Of course not. Like, wisdom, of course, wisdom. But paranoid parenting, parental overconcern, has the net effect of making kids more fragile. I bumped into one mum. I was giving a talk in the Illawarra region. She was really offended by this conversation that we're having now, and she spoke to me afterwards and said, well, I'll have you know that I don't let my 17-year-old ride his bike to the shops. And I don't think that I'm a helicopter parenting. I don't think I'm over-parenting him. I said, sorry, how old is he? And she said, 17. I said, he doesn't have a license? And she said, no, he won't be having one of them until he's 21. I said, okay. Sorry, and he's 17, and how far away are the shops that he's not allowed to ride to? About 1 kilometre. Do you live near a highway? Like, is it just a really dangerous, like, are there knives and bombs and guns where you live? Like, what's happening where you are? She just lived in a quiet little suburb. It was a few back streets, about 1 kilometre, but it's very hilly, and cars come out of the driveways without looking. Anxiety goes up as parents are overly controlling. Further analysis, by the way, showed that this result was particularly strong for studies with an overrepresentation of girls, and for school-aged children, and for families from higher socioeconomic backgrounds. We are much more protective of our girls than our boys. And when we earn bigger bucks, we invest more, and therefore we worry more, and we have higher expectations. Lenore Skenazy was named the world's worst mum a few years ago when she let her 9-year-old son ride the subway in New York City home on his own. How many of you have been to New York City and ridden the subway? How many of you would let your 9-year-old ride the subway home? No way. Now, it was 2 stations. He'd done it 1 million times. Like, they were New York natives. He knew where he was going. They talked about it ahead of time. The parents were already out. They said, all right, sweetheart, we're going to catch the bus. You know where the bus is in case things go wrong with the train? But we're just going to jump on the bus and we'll be home in 10 minutes. We'll see you at home when you get there. They gave him the cash. He jumped on the subway. He got home 3 minutes after them. But she ended up everywhere for letting it happen because people say, well, what would you do if something happened? But you can't live your life like that, right? Because what's the correct answer to what would you do if something happened? You'd be devastated. But you send your kids to school, you get in the car every day with your kids. Like, everything that we do is associated with risk. It's true that some things are riskier than others, but you've got to let your kids live a little. And the research tells us that this safety culture, this paranoid parenting, this avoidance reinforcing anxiety is, without question, going to only elevate anxiety. Next, the safety culture. Helicopter parenting is harming our kids. This is from Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukinoff in their book, The Coddling of the American Mind, which I cannot recommend highly enough. They say, when children are raised in a culture of safetyism, which teaches them to stay emotionally safe while protecting them from every imaginable danger, it may set up a feedback loop. Kids become more fragile and less resilient, which signals to adults that they need more protection, which makes them even more fragile and less resilient. In other words, I see my child, let's start with a toddler. My child wants to climb up the slippery dip the wrong way at the park, and the big kids are sliding down and the toddler's trying to climb up the slide instead of going up the stairs. And what happens is, as parents, we might get really anxious. We're like, oh, what are you doing? Oh, stop this, you're going to get hurt. And the toddler sees our anxiety and goes, oh, I need to be scared of this. And we see the toddler being anxious and we're like, oh, they're really scared, I need to get in there fast. And they're like, oh, my mum's hurrying, I need to be worried. And so we set up this spiral of anxiety and we bounce off each other. That's kind of what they're saying. Except we don't just do it with slippery dips at parks, we do it with school refusal, or we do it with struggles with friends, or we do it with worries about anxiety around exams, or the Eisteddfod, which is coming up sometime soon, or the cross country, or the swimming carnival, or whatever it might be. So does that mean that we need to protect our kids from the swimming carnival? Or does that mean that our kids have to do it at the swimming carnival? Again, I don't know. I don't know that there's a right answer here. My kids love the swimming carnival. But there's some kids there who hate the swimming carnival because they're going to show up and they're going to look completely incompetent, they're going to look completely stupid in front of their friends. They can't swim literally to save themselves. And there's an expectation that they have to be at the swimming carnival and they have to swim. If I had a child who was in that situation, I probably wouldn't send them to the swimming carnival. Or I would send them to swimming lessons so that they could learn to swim, so that they could actually be competent at the swimming carnival. Yep. That's a conversation that my wife and I just had on the podcast the other day. What can you do to participate without swimming? Or if you're not a runner and you hate the cross country, what can you do to participate without running? How can you support others? How can you be involved? How can you be engaged? What are the other ways that you can be a participant here, even if you're not going to win the gold medal? And what you're effectively doing in that is, if we go back to this slide here, you're saying, let's help you to be present. We're not going to let you completely avoid it, but let's also help you to participate in a way that everyone can feel good about. And I think that that's a reasonable balance. I'm not into forcing kids into situations where they're going to be embarrassed and their anxiety is going to be raised because it's just not for them. I think that we can be a little bit more compassionate there. One should be safe, I've written here, not just from car accidents and sexual assault, but from people who disagree with you. Because that's what Facebook's become. And that's what the world is increasingly becoming. We can't tolerate somebody with a divergent view from us. I love it when people challenge me. I love it when people have a different view. I'm like, wow, tell me more. Wow, you really like... Let me be political for a second. I'm using this as an example. This is not me, I'm just using an example. You really like the Greens? Tell me more. Or, you really like Pauline Hanson? Wow, I've never met anyone who felt that way. Tell me more. Or, you're really impressed with Scott Morrison. Oh, that's fascinating. I'd love to know why. Or, you're going to vote for Albanese? Huh. Why? I'm just using that as an example because the safety culture says that we can only be around people who agree with us and who protect us and make us feel emotionally safe and physically safe. And that's why anxiety is going up, because we don't know, our kids don't know how to have effective disagreements with people anymore. It just doesn't work. This is a quote from a Chief Justice in the United States, John Roberts, I think his name was. It's on the next slide. And he was talking to a graduating class just a few years ago. And I think this should be compulsory reading for every child. From time to time in the years to come, I hope you will be treated unfairly, so that you will come to know the value of justice. I hope that you will suffer betrayal, because that will teach you the importance of loyalty. Sorry to say, but I hope that you will be lonely from time to time, so that you don't take friends for granted. I wish you bad luck again from time to time, so that you will be conscious of the role of chance in life and understand that your success is not completely deserved and that the failure of others is not completely deserved either. And when you lose, as you will from time to time, I hope every now and then your opponent will gloat over your failure. It's a way for you to understand the importance of sportsmanship. I hope you'll be ignored so you know the importance of listening to others. And I hope that you'll have just enough pain to learn compassion. Whether I wish these things or not, they're going to happen. And whether you benefit from them or not will depend upon your ability to see the message in your misfortune. We're not wishing ill on anyone. We're just saying life happens. And we can't protect our kids from life. But what we can do is we can support them. We can support them effectively. This is not a suck-it-up princess conversation. In fact, exactly the opposite. I don't believe in suck-it-up princess at all. Why else is anxiety through the roof? We've got to talk about social media just briefly, or anti-social media. 2 activities related to depression and anxiety in our kids: electronic device usage and watching TV. Now, let me be really clear about this. This is not an issue for ultra-social kids. Kids that are doing well offline don't have any problems online. Kids that are struggling offline will often have even bigger problems online. Girls tend to be more affected by social media than boys. People say, well, what about screen time? What about screen time? Screen time is not really an issue. Really. There's so much data that's out there now. And unless your kids are getting more than 5 or 6 hours of screen time a day, it's not really going to be an issue. It's not going to impact their well-being that much. Let me ask Karen, can I ask you a personal question? Approximately how much food time have you had today? Yeah, how much food time have you had? 45 minutes of food time. 45 minutes. What does that tell us about Karen? She hasn't eaten enough today? Some of you are thinking, my goodness, she's been eating for 45 minutes. Like, can I ask you how much food time you've had today? 20 minutes of food time. How does that sound to you all? Does that sound reasonable? Some of you are shaking your heads. Is there a problem with my question? What does the amount of food time that these 2 people have had in their day tell me about their physical health? Nothing. What question do I need to ask? What did you eat today? What does your diet consist of? When it comes to screens, that's a much better question to ask than how much. It's what kind. Don't worry about how much. Worry about what kind. So there's 3 C's of screen use: consumption, connection, creation. 1 is passive, 2 are active. Consumption is passive. Consumption is gaming. Consumption. And now I know some of you are thinking, but what about Roblox and Minecraft? They're creating Fortnite. They're connecting. They're yelling at somebody. That's connection. TikTok. That's not just consumption. I mean, they're doing dances. For our conversation tonight, consumption is social media and gaming and Netflix. You know what? I actually think that watching good quality television is better for our kids than most of what they're doing on the internet when it comes to consumption. And there's some recent studies out of the University of South Australia that would support that, especially for our little kids. Just get them to watch Bluey. Put iView on, put it on repeat, just watch Bluey. Watch it with them, cry a bit, laugh a bit, take them to the movies with Bluey. It's perfect. Consumption is a well-being reducer and an anxiety builder. And the more you consume, the more your anxiety goes up. This is particularly the case for teenage girls, more than any other cohort, teenage girls. Connection and creation, go for your life, kids. Get stuck into it, enjoy it, have fun. It's good for you. The other issue that we've got with screens, though, is that we need to make sure that they're not displacing the other stuff that matters in life. Because if you don't get enough sleep, and if you're not connecting with real people in real life, and if you're not being physically active, and if you're not involved in some sort of sport or art or drama or having a hobby of some kind, that's also a risk factor. Okay? What else have we got up here? Oh, the push for perfectionism. The expectations that kids face today compared to any other time in the history of the world, I think, is unparalleled. For us, it wasn't this serious. We just put so much pressure on our kids, and if it's not us, sometimes it's school systems or governments or employers or the kids themselves. But the push for perfectionism is over the top, it's unhealthy, and Instagram and social media only fuel that. It's over the top, the resume arms race, so that kids can have success. So I think that they're probably the biggest predictors outside of just an anxious temperament disposition. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was going to say you're probably not happy, but they get what they get. Yeah. So let's talk about let's talk about how we can help the kids, okay? And then we're going to move into oh gosh, I mean we've got about another 3 hours worth of content. Let's talk about how we can help them, because we've spent a lot of time on the problems. When you've got kids who are perfectionistic, that can actually be good or it can be bad, depending on if they've got perfectionistic concerns, that is, it's who I am, it's my identity, or perfectionistic strivings. I just want to do really well at this because I love to do well. The short answer, though, is when the kids don't do well, you respond to them by acknowledging how they feel. Remember that whole feelings thing? You say, you seem really disappointed. And then just let them be disappointed. And once they've been disappointed for a bit, you say, I know you're really disappointed about this. What can I do to help you here? What would make you rethink your feelings on this? Or how could you do better next time, and what can I do to support you? Because this obviously matters a lot to you. I think the other thing that you can say to them is the 3 most important words that any kid can hear. And that's not, I love you. It's the 3 words that come after it, no matter what. So if they're disappointed because they didn't make the team, or they didn't get the A's, or they didn't get the lead part in Footloose, the musical, and they really had their heart set on it, they're going to be disappointed. And trying to tell them to cheer up, or it'll be right, or maybe next time, all those things that we say, calm down, it's not that bad. Well, it actually is, and they don't want to calm down, and there isn't going to be a next time, and it's a catastrophe for me right now, and I can't stand it, and I didn't get A's, I got a B. And I think that it's really important that we just acknowledge that that's how they feel, and be totally fine with them feeling like that, and then say to them, well, how can we do something about this? Because I hate seeing you like this. What do you want to do about it next time? What can I do to help you? And sometimes there's nothing you can do. And in that case, I love to do what I call giving them in fantasy what they can't have in reality. So I love to say to them, well, there's obviously nothing we can do, but don't you wish we could? Like, we know the teacher that gave you that B. We know where they live. Wouldn't you love to just, no. I'm so sorry, I didn't, I stopped. But you could say, wouldn't it be great if we could go back in time? Wouldn't it be amazing if you could sit there knowing what you know now and redo that exam? Wouldn't it be amazing if you could do the tryouts or the Eisteddfod or the performance or the this or the that and just have one more shot at it? What would you do different if you could? Oh, and how good would that feel? And they can't have it. But just imagining kind of just makes you feel better because it makes you feel heard. To put this into an adult context, a few years ago, Kylie and I were looking to buy a new house. And we've been looking for a couple of years when I found the house of our dreams. I called out to Kylie and I said, honey, I found it. I found the house. And she came to look at the pictures, and we were looking at the pictures, and she said, hang on, how much is this house? And I said, that's not important, honey, just look at the pictures. She said, how much is the house? She starts reading the description. Lachlan and Sarah Murdoch were selling their Bronte beachfront in the eastern suburbs of Sydney for a cool $13.5 million, which just happened to be about $13 million more than we had. And Kylie could have done any number of things. She could have said, oh, stop wasting my time. Don't be so silly. This is ridiculous. She could have done any of that, but she gave me in fantasy what I couldn't have in reality. She said, oh, well, it's certainly an expensive house. Wouldn't it be amazing if we could live there? Look at the view from the bathroom. Who gets to sit on the loo and look at that? She said, they've got a car elevator. You can drive in and the car can go down under the house. That is pretty special. She said to me something along the lines of, I can see why you've fallen in love with this house. Thanks for showing me. And as she walked out of the room, she said, what do you think we should do about it now? Now, I could have looked at her and gone, oh, that is so low. But that's not how I felt. I felt really honoured in that moment. So when our kids are having this big anxiety moment, we can give them in fantasy what they can't have in reality. Don't you just wish that you weren't worried about this? Wouldn't it be amazing? What would you do if this was the case? And it sounds kind of cruel until you put it into an adult perspective and you're like, no, now I feel honoured. Question at the back.
I was going to say, but what we do is we focus on the achievement and on getting the A grade, and we expect our kids to do that. And that they don't have to control over that because they may not be able to achieve it. But if you focus on the effort and something they can control how much effort they put into it. That will reduce their anxiety, or hopefully reduce anxiety, and give them the ability to control what they achieve. So they try as best they can, doesn't matter whether they get a D, as long as they have an A for effort. That's the most important thing.
So
We're trying to get them to achieve something that they never achieve, which makes them feel anxious, upset.
So here's the challenge with saying, I don't care what the grade is so long as you try really hard. Who decides how hard they've tried? I agree with you, by the way. I agree with you in principle, but in practice, it's a little bit tricky. So I had one of my kids come to me and she said, Dad, I tried so hard. I tried so hard. She was in tears. And she said, I only got a C. Now remember, the way they grade now, C means that you're doing okay. C is like you're passing. You're doing okay. Because it's not like it used to be when we were at school. They've changed the whole grading thing. But she was devastated that she only got a C. And I said to her, oh, you feel really bad about it. See, I could have said, oh, don't worry, or any of those things, but I said, you feel really lousy about the C because of all the effort you put in. And she said, Dad, I'm actually not that worried about the C. At this school, they had a report card that gave you the actual grade and then a grade for effort. She said, I got a C for effort as well. I can't even pass trying. Yeah, ouch. And she said, but my teacher doesn't know how hard I tried. She was in tears. She was just distraught. She's like, I've tried so hard, and I'd watched her try. The Carol Dweck thing, don't praise the outcome, praise the effort. Don't praise them at all. There's enough research out there. I'm going to say it really clearly. Carol Dweck's wrong on this. She's ignoring a huge body of research because she's done a handful of really interesting experiments that are not easily replicable, except by her. And what has happened is that we've got this mindset where we're supposed to be praising and praising and praising, but not the outcome, the effort. Oh, you tried so hard. Great job trying. But it still comes across as evaluation. The better thing to do with the kids is not to praise them at all, not to evaluate them at all. Say to them, well, how do you feel you did? Like my kids will run and they're like, I got an A, Dad, I got an A, I'm so stoked. And I'll say, you seem over the moon. You seem elated. You seem full of joy. I don't use those words. I'm expanding our emotional vocabulary tonight, okay? I say, you seem really stoked about that. You seem really excited. Have I praised her? Not a bit. I've described what I'm seeing. If she comes in and she says, oh, I had the worst day ever, I failed. I'll say, you seem really low about that. Failing hurts, doesn't it? What I'm doing is I'm just describing. And if she got the A, I'm going to say, so how does it feel? What did you think when you saw it? How did you get the A? Tell me all about what happened to get to the A. Every now and again she'll say, oh, Dad, I worked so hard. Other times she'll say, oh, it was a bit of a fluke, to be honest. I say, well, what do you learn? What do we do next time? Same process. Make sense? Move the evaluation away. Get rid of the evaluation. Let's do a quick summary. To deal effectively with anxiety in our children, we have to deal effectively with the anxiety in ourselves about our children. Okay? What we're teaching our kids when we're over anxious is that the world is full of evil people, the world is unsafe, and the world is unpredictable. Or school is. Or the neighbourhood is, or the park is, or the beach is, or the river is, or the whatever. But what they need to hear is that the world is full of good people and the world is mostly safe, but we should be cautious at certain times and in certain places. And that the world is relatively predictable. That's what they need to hear. Which means that we've got to be confident and positive about the world and about school and about life without trying to make them believe it. But that's how we've got to live around them. Now, quick question, is it true? No. It's not true. The world is not safe. The world is not predictable. The world is not full of good people. Well, it mostly is, but not fully. But they need to believe that it is. Why? Because if they don't believe it, then they're going to be anxious. They're going to be terrified. They're never going to try anything. They're going to be scared. We live our lives like it's true, unless we're dealing with anxiety and depression ourselves. And we need to help our kids to believe that as well. So, Robert Putnam wrote this fantastic book, and in the book he says, moderate stress buffered by supportive adults is not necessarily harmful. Let me say that again. Moderate stress buffered by supportive adults is not necessarily harmful and may even be helpful in that it can promote the development of coping skills. That's what we're about. That's what we're trying to do. So what do we do about it? In 3 minutes or less, we need to teach our kids a handful of things. Number one, anxiety is normal and healthy. I cannot tell you how many people I've taught this to who have said, I never knew that. I can't emphasize this enough. When your kids are feeling anxious, you let them know, it's great that you're feeling anxious, it's normal that you're feeling anxious, it's normal to feel anxious. If you didn't feel anxious, then you probably would not be okay. People who don't feel anxiety usually die young, prematurely. They do things that other people get anxious about and therefore don't do. It's good to be anxious. Like bungee jumping in Queenstown. It's good to be anxious. I draw this graph for people. Another word for anxiety is arousal. If there is zero arousal, what's the performance like? There is none. It's a psychological term, okay? For those of you who are giggling under your breath. You're safe. Okay. But when arousal increases, performance does too, until we get to a certain point where the arousal is too great and then performance diminishes again. Yes, I realise what I just said. But I'm talking about it from an anxiety point of view. Thank you very much. What happens is we're supposed to feel anxious about stuff. We're supposed to feel anxious about the exam. We're supposed to feel anxious about the performance. We're supposed to feel anxious about whatever it is, catching up with friends. We're supposed to feel anxious before we have our first kiss. We're supposed to have those feelings. They protect us. But we also need to know when to listen to them and when to sort of push past where the optimal level of arousal is. Encourage mindfulness. Now, that means breathing. Somebody mentioned breathing a little bit earlier. Just slow it down. Just a bit. My favourite mindfulness exercise, I shared it with the staff today. I'm not going to go through it with you now, but I'm going to mention what it is. Go through the 5 senses. Get your child to say, what are 5 things that I can see? What are 4 things that I can feel? What are 3 things that I can hear? What are 2 things that I can smell? What's 1 thing that I can taste? What that does is it brings them back into the moment. Remember, fear, apprehension, worry about the future. That's what anxiety is. Get them to come back to now. And that little activity is incredible for doing that. I've already mentioned this, so I'm going to move on because we need to wrap up. If your kids are anxious, help them be ultra-social. Now, I know that some kids are introverts. They don't have lots of friends. Just 1 friend is enough. A couple of friends, small friendship circles, but get them out and about, get them face-to-face, get them doing things with people, even if it's not face-to-face, even if it's side-by-side. It will reduce anxiety when they're with people. Humans are designed to be with people. Second, get them to use their body. Cannot tell you what a difference it makes when they're physically active for their anxiety. It's off the scale effective. Number 3, create margin. Create margin. Are they overscheduled? Is there too much going on? Is there too much pressure? Number 4, tell them to get curious. Some fascinating research over the last decade or so shows that the number 1 antidote for anxiety is curiosity. Get close to it. What are you worried about? Well, let's understand it better. Let's move in towards it rather than shying away from it. Remember, avoidance reinforces anxiety, so let's not avoid it. Let's get closer to it. Like if you're scared of spiders, this is what psychologists do, this thing called exposure therapy, where you get closer and closer and closer to it. I'm not suggesting that you as parents do exposure therapy with your children if they're anxious about stuff. It's best done under professional guidance. But the idea here is if you've got a child who's really scared about something, really anxious about something, well, what is it about that? Well, what if we just get a little bit closer to it without going too close? Well, let's take another step closer. Look at what you're doing. Are you still feeling anxious? And so we move in, we get closer. There's one more thing that I'm going to share with you. And I think that it's the best antidote of all to anxiety. First, a quick reminder, I've got a bunch of books over here, and they're really popular, and people love them, and they make families happier, and that's all I'm going to say about them. I wish I could tell you more about it, but we're out of time. We've got this thing called a Happy Family membership, and you can get a free trial, and there's a website there, and take a photo of it, because I haven't got time to tell you any more about it, because I just got the look. And the last thing that I want to share with you, if we want to help our children to overcome anxiety, is to help them to get outside themselves by not thinking about themselves at all, by forgetting themselves and focusing on how they can help others. I don't know how, I don't understand the psychological process behind it, but if you've got kids who are anxious and they somehow find within themselves the capacity to reach out and make a difference in the lives of other people, they forget themselves. They forget what they're anxious about. They get involved in making a difference. They find purpose. They find meaning. They feel competent. They build relationships. And they develop a sense of control over their lives that they haven't previously had. You might do it through a church. You might do it through a charity. You might do it through the school. You might do it through your own networks, but helping your children to find ways to make a positive difference in the lives of others may be one of the most reliable ways to help them to overcome anxiety. You can probably tell I'm pretty passionate about this, and as you can also tell, I could talk to you until midnight, but it is time for us to wrap up. I'm really, really delighted to have a chat with you over here at the table and answer any questions that you might have. Bless you. I need to emphasize that I can't do therapy with you at the table. Wouldn't be appropriate, not the right context, and we also have teachers that need to lock up and get out of here. They've had a long day. But for the next 15 or 20 minutes, as everyone makes their way out, if I can help you with the books and if I can answer any of your questions, I'm really happy to do that. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful talking to you.
Justin, thank you so much. You're great talk. So much there about language, the language we use with kids. Just something struck me there as you said it towards the end. You know, like I had a conversation with my daughter recently about, she told me she's stressed. And I tried, I think, to have a conversation with her about trying to befriend stress, but we just make things like that so pejorative. And, if we don't have stress in our lives, our hearts are going to stop beating. So they're not bad things. Pressure's not awful things. So just your stuff around, what language do we use with kids is really worthwhile for us to think about, amongst so many other things. Great stuff there for us as parents and as educators. I hope the schools you're sending your children to are trying to do those things as we make them go to swimming carnivals and athletics carnivals. I hope there's ways we do that stuff to make them feel included. I hope as they go to classes that we keep welcoming them and encourage them and stretching them a little bit. But great challenges there for us, and we don't always get that right as schools, and we don't always get it right as parents. Thank you for your presence here tonight or virtually. The fact that you're here, the fact that you're interested is such a huge thing for your children, that you care. Thank God for that. So thank you for coming. Thank you very much, Justin. You're very welcome in Bundaberg. Please thank him again for me. Thanks, everyone. Good night. God bless.